Welcome to Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. I am your host, Dean Anderson, and on today's show we have Ned Burwell, who is not only a mental health advocate, but he is a musician and artist, and he has a whole bunch of stuff to share with us today. Thanks for being on the show, Ned.
Thanks for having me, Dean. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know what? We had some great conversations before we even started here, and you are a multifaceted, fascinating person with the work that you're doing. So we're going to peel some layers off that, but right off the get-go, I understand that you are one of the, if not the founder of a big movement for mental health that started a long time ago, long enough ago in southwestern Ontario. And I'd love if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, in 2016,
2016, okay.
I started doing semicolon tattoos, and that sort of morphed into something different. And I did semicolons for a couple of years, and I thought, you know, this is great, and it helps build connections between people, and we raise some money for mental health, all positives. But I wanted to kind of put out a stronger message. So as my fundraising efforts for mental health carried forward, I started doing Be Love tattoos.
Okay.
So it's a little bee and then a heart.
Okay.
And it's something that we could sort of do as quickly as we could do as a semicolon.
Yeah.
But it carried a message, a really positive message.
Okay.
You know, and the slogan or the motto behind it was be loving to the world, be loving to other people, most importantly, be loving to yourself. So
yeah, okay, that's wonderful. I mean, this is right in line with the show and the things that we want to talk about.
That's right.
I would like to take a little sidestep and, you know, assuming that the audience doesn't know what a semicolon is or the reason why we would segue from that, can you tell everybody at home, the significance of the semicolon tattoo and what it means if they see somebody with one?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been adopted as a symbol of my story isn't over. It's just a pause. And it is a great reminder. I find that a lot of my clients, when they're struggling, they'll look down. If they've got one of those semicolons, they'll look down on that and just remember that, oh yeah, my story isn't over. There's an and a forward movement I can still make. So it's a wonderful symbol to put on your body as a reminder.
I think that there's a lot of significance to other individuals as well. I've heard people doing that, not just for their own mental health, but as a significant attachment to someone that they might have lost or somebody else who is struggling with
That's right.
mental health, and to recognize that, it's a journey, not a destination. Right?
That's right.
It's part of the process of moving forward. So
who hasn't been affected by mental health? Like we all know somebody that has struggled. We've probably struggled at least once or twice ourselves.
Yeah.
But I know in the lineups for these events that we do, they're there for all different types of reasons.
Sure.
We see a lot of parents concerned about the well-being and direction their child is going. And there's just, when we do these events, the best part about it, and so there's a bit of a subtext or an undercurrent of what I'm trying to do with all these events, is it's important to me to create community, create connection.
Yeah.
And the connection that happens at the event is one thing. Like when I'm tattooing, whatever the design is on the person, I'm trying to connect, trying to have, even if it's just for two minutes to do their tattoo, I'm trying to have the moment with them, try to put something really loving and positive into that person while I'm with them. And then moreover, after the event, it's important that this kind of keeps rolling. And that's sort of been my agenda after doing these charity events is we'll typically hand out cards, and they'll have a sentiment on it like, you're important, you're special. And this card was given to you today to remind you of that. So we usually hand out little stacks of those. So we just keep this movement rolling forward and creating a ripple in community.
That's amazing.
And like after the last few years of disconnect and isolation, what I think we need most now is connection. We really need to come together and connect You know, it's such an important topic, right?
It's a huge topic. I see it every day in the addiction world, and I see it where we have disconnected. We have a false sense of connection through media and through digital things, but they're not the level of connection that we have been used to as a society. And where our, you know, when we saw COVID, there was a lot of isolation and a lot of disconnection in the world. And there are some really intelligent people that will say that connection is the opposite of addiction. And I think that that's you know, very well put, and there's something serious to be said about that. So that's a wonderful movement. Do you have any, and I'm going to put you on the spot, but I'm going to assume that there's some stories or some examples of when people have been profoundly impacted by the connection that they've had, or their tattoo maybe had some meaningful result and they shared them with you after. Do you have anything like that?
Hundreds, if not thousands.
Yeah, give me one, Ned.
Yeah, people have been celebrating and helping heal with tattoos for thousands of years. As long as people have been standing upright, we've been kind of hunching back over and tattooing ourselves. And so tattooing, people show up to get a tattoo at different points in their lives, quite often when they're struggling. And I've heard so many stories about, you know, people that have overcome addictions, like what this show is about. People that have had terrible tragedies in their lives, but in spite of it, they're still moving forward. I had a friend come in and she wanted to get her whole back tattooed. And I've been tattooing her since she was 16 years old. Maybe she's even 15. I know I was 17 when I started tattooing her professionally. And she said, Ned, I just want you to do whatever you want. And I'm like, wow, this is quite an honor to do that. And but I knew her story. She had a terrible accident. She lost a partner in a snowmobile accident. And, you know, she had gone through so many adversities in her life, and you know, I won't touch into too many of them, but so the tattoo I designed for her was, you know, a lady, a goddess holding this skull. And normally I wouldn't put a skull on a female, but she loved them. So I had this lady holding the skull, and it represented her getting hold of her darkness. And then I had another version of a person that was all cracked and broken, and that represented her going through her healing. And the last one was she was cracked but not broken. And at the bottom of her back there was a big swan, and it represented the grace that she had going through this. And then in behind the swan was a big mandala, which inevitably a dark time will sometimes be a doorway into some of our greatest awakenings. It'll be an opportunity for us to sort of throw all our pieces down, and we fall apart in these dark times. But in that falling apart, there'll be pieces that we leave on the ground, things that we don't pick up again. There'll be pieces that we pick back up, but they fit differently together. And I think that's the beauty of going through struggles. I think we're meant to go through struggles. As far as stories about tattoos, you know, people just come in all the time. I've heard many stories about abuse, sexual abuse, men and women, you know, and just some really tough moments. But it fuels me to really show up for people and listen and try to understand. And that listening piece and just really connecting with that person brings a connection, and it's just such an honor to do the work that I do.
I hear so much symbolism, and I'm hearing storytelling, I'm hearing vulnerability, you know, all of those things kind of getting wrapped up into the artwork and to the process of being tattooed. And I know I have a couple myself, and sitting down and trusting another individual to put something on my body that would be there forever was very vulnerable or potentially forever, a very vulnerable experience, which I think a lot of people with mental health and addiction struggle with.
That's right.
So it would be fair to say that this is opportunity for them to participate that in some sort of controlled environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
And the vulnerability part, it's vulnerability leads us into sometimes the most beautiful experiences. Like I talk about relationships quite a bit, and my wife and I, when I learned to be vulnerable with my wife, the communication that comes forward out of that vulnerability is just tremendous. And when somebody's vulnerable with me and I nurture them with love, care, and compassion,
Right.
the stories that sort of come forward are like, I just feel so incredibly blessed to be able to participate with somebody enough that they'll share their stories with me. And so I get to hear stories. I tell stories while I'm tattooing, and I create stories with my art.
Right. So would you, I know from my experience, I've had a couple of, 5, 6, 7 hour sessions where I sat there. That's a long time to sit with an individual. And I think that there's a part where the tattoo artist turns into the bartender or the therapist.
Yeah.
In that sense, right? So would that be a fair assessment to say that there's times of kind of doing that vulnerable experience while being an artist?
Yeah, and I think that's what led me to go into working in mental health is part of the reason. I had my own struggles. I was suicidal 3 points in my life.
Okay.
And I've written extensively about that in some of my books. I've written nonfiction books, and I wrote a fictional story based on true events about a retreat I went to in Mexico. It was way back in the jungle, and it's quite an adventure. So many things happened that I just thought I could write a story about this.
Okay.
But yeah, there's just so much that goes on, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to totally, after break, talk more about your personal journey if you're comfortable with that.
Sure.
So I'm going to put a pin in that for a moment. I would love to talk a little bit more about that transition into your advocacy work through tattooing and artists, because I do understand that you do even more things other than the tattooing. We talk about the segue to mental health and advocacy and the Be Loved tattoos, but I understand that you do more. Tell me about the more.
Well, my neighbor calls me a Swiss Army knife.
A mental health Swiss Army knife?
Yeah, he says you got so many attachments. And he's just such a fun guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there was a natural progression to get into mental health advocacy.
Okay.
Again, through my own struggles. I went to a darkness in myself, and then I got to a point where I needed help, and I asked for help. And after a stint of doing all that work, and I found the Ashaya monks, and my first teacher was a local doctor, and that's a crazy story. Like, we don't have time for that today.
Another time where we're going to have coffee separately and talk about that.
It's a very fascinating story. But there was this slowly, there was healing, and it happened over a certain amount of years. And now that I've got through a lot of my healing, and I think there's always more work to do in clearing and healing in yourself, and when there's space for you to dip into something deeper, sometimes these old things will just pop up because there's room for that to come forward to heal more. Sure. But now that I've been working through this for so many years, there's so little of me that wants for anything, and it leaves me to be more present and in the moment with people. It leaves me to want to leave the world a better place. When you want for nothing, well, when you have everything, you'd be a fool to ask for more.
Yeah.
And there's no more in my life that I need other than just building wonderful connections with people and doing what I can for mental health and spiritual health as well in the community.
Fantastic. So going from a an Ashaya monk to being a Swiss Army knife with all the attachments when you're not supposed to have attachments.
That's right.
We're going to come right back. We're going to take a break right now. We'll be right back after this break with more of Ned the Swiss Army knife. Welcome back to Invisible: Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction, and we have mental health advocate Ned on the show. Ned, welcome back. You had opened up to some vulnerable stuff in the first half there, and I would love to kind of talk a little bit more about that briefly, if you're comfortable. You had mentioned, kind of being in a dark place that kind of led you to advocacy, and some traveling and some writing and some other stuff. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, there was definitely a few dark periods in my life, and I thank God for those periods, to be honest. They were not fun to get through, and it was tough. I think there was, when I became suicidal, it was a point in my life where there was an aspect of me that actually needed to die. It wasn't my physical body, and it was never my physical being that wanted to die when I became suicidal. There was an aspect of me that I needed to let go. There's a portion of that old story that I'd sort of wound up in my mind thousands of times, and the spring had become so tight that I was about to burst. And I think that was the core of my issues, is not anything going on outside. It was all between my ears, and the built up trauma and drama that I just carry forward from all this time in my mind grinding these gears. And so my first step out of it, was when my big step out of it was when this local doctor came and helped me out. And then that sort of segued into meeting the Ashaya monks and learning how to watch my mind versus being subject to the thoughts. I was so self-identified as every thought, feeling that came into this body. I thought that was me. Well, it's a byproduct of being human, but it doesn't make up the essence of who or what you are or why we're here. We're here for a much bigger reason than to entertain a stream of consciousness running through our mind.
Right.
There's so much going on. But for me, like I said, I was wound up and distracted by this commentary that was trapped in my mind for years. And I didn't know that I could set it down, that I should set it down, or that, if I did, what would happen? Would I cease to exist? Right. Absolutely not. But you sort of build up this sense of self through the thoughts that you keep, and this identity, and then life becomes just this habitual motion that we are perpetually walking, but the scenery never changes because what's going on in our mind doesn't change.
Yeah, everywhere I go, there I am.
Absolutely.
There's something that comes to mind when you're talking about that. I hear the idea of a false sense of self. Right, and that turmoil is actually that needs to go away, not me, not my body or whatever. That false idea of who we are. There's a book by Michael Singer called The Untethered Soul, and I don't know if you've ever read it, but in that book he says, the most amount of personal growth comes when I recognize that I am not the voice in my head, but the person that listens to it.
That's right.
And that idea of me, if I heard the way I talked to myself and the way I identified and the things that I said, or and if I was to be outside of that, listening to that conversation, I'd be like, stop being so abusive to that person. What are you doing? Right? We would not hang out with that person if that was the case. So we certainly have an opportunity to change our relationship to self through that gap in here, right?
Yeah.
So that was the big turning point was going into the monks. And working in that way, and then writing some books.
Yeah, I left, when I left the monks, I went to Western for a couple of years, took psychology and a writing course. I didn't get a degree or anything, but it was just personal interest. And so I did a couple of years of that, and then It wasn't until 2016 that I really got turned on to mental health. We had a rash of suicides in Oxford County where I was living. And I was living in Middlesex at the time, but I'm born in Oxford County. So I started doing the mental health tattooing, and then I did that for a few years, raised a significant amount of money, like $250,000.
Wow.
In a very short period of time. But I realized right away that mental health, you can throw all kinds of money at it, and we need our systems and services that we have in place, but it's an inside job. My mental health didn't get better until I made a choice. I had to, I remember the most vulnerable time in my life was being suicidal, and then driving to a friend's house. It was actually the doctor that helped me out, and standing on his porch crying at 20 years old and having to ring this man's doorbell. What a vulnerable thing for a 20-year-old. And I was a tattoo guy, so I thought I was pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm too cool to be vulnerable.
Yeah, I'm too cool for this.
Yeah.
But it was that willingness to move forward and help myself and ask for help was a piece that really helped push me into a better place.
Okay. No, I really appreciate that, and I appreciate your vulnerability, and even earlier saying about 3 separate times of having suicidal thoughts or attempts in the past. It's not a shameful thing that I think a lot of people recognize, and I think we need to talk about that. That it's something that people deal with, and it's not something shameful that we should have to hide in. Right.
I have a story for you though, Dean. Is when I was 18 years old, I went and I was going to go tattoo at this tattoo, or I wanted the tattoo at this tattoo convention. And so I called up the organizer. He was this old biker tattooist. And he was really gruff on the phone. He's like, "What's your shop name?" And I told him, "I've never heard of you. What are you, a scratcher?" And that's like a beginner tattooer.
Yeah.
I was, but
Yeah.
I was trying to represent myself as a professional. So then I go, he's like, this show is for professionals. So I go to his shop, and I said, well, let me just show you what if I come and show you my portfolio? So I bring my portfolio, and the day that I was set up to see this guy, I pull the door of his shop, and he and his wife are in this knockdown, drag-out fight. And I'm like, oh, I think this was a bad time. I said, do you want me to come back another time? And he's like, no, come in. And his wife stormed off. But he's violently ripping through my portfolio of tattoos, but then he stops and goes back to the start. And I said, oh, because I thought there's no way I'm going to get into this thing. But then after he started slowly going through my work, he hands my portfolio back, and he says, Ned, this show is for people like you. And I was blown away. So he gives me the vendor application to pay for the show and all the guidelines. And I'm driving home, and I'm like, no, I can't do that. I thought I was going to get rejected, really. I'd made up in my mind that this is not going to work out. So it was like 2 weeks before the show. He calls me up, and he's this crusty old biker. He said, Ned, where the heck is he had more colorful language. Where's your registration? And I said, that thing, I think maybe this year I'll be a spectator. And he goes, no, you're not, you're coming. So then I'm like, okay, yeah, no problem. And I hang up the phone. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. So then a week before the show, he calls me back up, and he says, Ned, where's your registration? Did you mail that? And I'm like, no, I just don't think I'm ready. He says, you're ready? You're coming? He says, the booth is half price. Pay me at the end of the weekend if you make money. And I'm like, oh man, I have to go. Now I have to go. Like I'd be really disrespecting his generosity, and it'd be very disingenuous of me. So how I got through that, and this is how I got through a lot of things in my life, is that I didn't know how I was going to make it to the end of the weekend, and I was so nervous. I was nervous about everything. There was going to be 50 Canadian tattooers there.
Wow.
And little 18-year-old me that doesn't really know what he's doing. But what I did was I knew that I had to pack the car when the day came, so I did that. And then I drove to Guelph. And I'm sitting in front of the convention hall and scared out of my mind, but I said, all I have to do is put my equipment in the hall. And then so the weekend rolled on like that. And it was such a learning experience for me, is that I think when I was struggling the most, I was always looking to the end goal. I wasn't really conscious of what's around me.
Right.
I think there's always so much around us that we're missing. And it's imperative, looking back at my unhealed and struggling self, that if I'd have just known to apply that wisdom I learned at 18 throughout my journey more, how helpful that would have been.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a huge part to, break things down into bite-sized pieces and make them manageable. I can do one thing, I can't do 100 things. And
that's right.
That's a major part of mental health and the addiction and the work that we do is, that old adage, how do you eat an elephant? And it's
one bite at a
time, right? We're running out of time, but there's a couple other things that I wanted to talk about, and we're running short, so we have to be kind of quick on this. But you are not only author, artist, musician, advocate, ordained. You're also an award winner.
Yes.
Right. Tell me really quick about the award that you've just recently won.
So this year, the CMHA awarded me with Champion of Mental Health and Addictions for 2024.
Nice.
It's for Oxford, Elgin, and Middlesex.
Nice. That's a big honor. And it sounds like, from what you've told me, that it's well deserved. And then you get like a check for $1 million or something. Or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
You get the opportunity to continue to keep doing the work that you're doing with a little extra shine on it, I think.
That's right.
And well deserved, which is beautiful. So I really appreciate the work you're doing. So that will segue into the last thing, which is, I understand you have a fundraiser coming up that we would love to maybe get going across the bottom of the screen here.
Sure.
For you. But if you'd like to tell us about what you're doing with Stevens Children's Camp, that would be fantastic.
Yes, the Stevenson Children's Camp, we're doing a fundraiser this summer, June 15th and 16th. We're going to be doing tattooing. Okay. We have intuitive readers. A whole bunch of wellness practitioners are coming to give their services. We'll have food vendors, musicians, a local chainsaw artist. So it's planning to be, it's a pretty big event. It's more like a festival than just a simple charity event.
Wow. So you're going to be giving children tattoos?
We couldn't get insurance for that. So.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ned. Thank you for all the work that you're doing, and thank you for being on the show. And if the audience wants to contribute, we'll put some information on the bottom of the screen to find out about what you're doing with Stevenson's Children's Camp. So thanks again. Thank you for watching Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction, and we'll see you next time.